What do these poor, innocent, ordinary Americans all have in common with Dr. Robert T. Tenny? They were all his patients and now his victims. And all of them or their surviving family members have sued Dr. Tenny for medical malpractice. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines to tell the true story of one of Dr. Tenny's victims, Maribeth Chase, who was the 77-year-old matron of the Chase family who raised her own children, John, Claire, Kit, and Abby, as a mother in a small town of Ida Grove, Iowa, and worked as a speech pathologist. Maribeth was an extraordinary mom and grandmother. She lived independently, had an active social life with many friends, drove her own car, and was going to the gym at the time she began to develop some blurred vision. Doctors determined she had a subdural hematoma. She was referred to Dr. Robert Tenny, the on-call neurosurgeon at Shawnee Mission Medical Center, who ordered a burr hole evacuation, just a routine and relatively low-risk neurosurgical procedure to remove the blood. That's where Maribeth tragically joined this extremely unfortunate group of victims of Dr. Tenny, who have been victimized by his medical malpractice and incompetence. 18 days later, after undergoing surgery by Dr. Tenny, Maribeth died unnecessarily and at the incompetent hands of this so-called doctor who still has his medical license 3 years after killing Maribeth Chase. Today, the Insider Exclusive exposes Dr. Tenny's attempts to blame others and cover up his negligence, and how the Chase family lawyers, Victor Bergman and Matt Birch, partners at the law firm of Schomburg, Johnson, and Bergman, uncovered the real truth of what really went on inside that operating room on that fateful day, February 26, 2007, and how they got justice for Maribeth Chase and her family. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from Kansas City, Missouri at the law firm of Schomburg, Johnson, and Bergman. It is my great pleasure to introduce Vic Bergman and Matt Birch to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and the kinds of cases that you represent.
Our firm has been around for many, many years. We are strictly a plaintiff's personal injury litigation firm, meaning we represent individuals and their families who have had catastrophic injury or death.
Let's talk about this case. Maribeth Chase against Dr. Robert T. Tenny. Tell us what happened.
Well, Mrs. Chase had a condition called a subdural hematoma and had surgery on the left side of her head. Simply, look at it almost as an oil change. They bored a couple of holes in the side of her head to let this old blood out.
Right.
She was supposed to be in the hospital a couple of days, had the surgery. Dr. Tenny wrote in his record everything went fine, came out, told the family everything went great. But when Mrs. Chase woke up in the post-operative recovery room, she was paralyzed on her right side and couldn't speak. Mm-hmm. Her son, John Chase, is the one who noticed it, had the nurse call Dr. Tenny, who had a CT scan of the brain done, which showed that there was blood inside the substance of the brain called the parenchyma. The only way blood can get into the substance of the brain is through trauma. It can't get there, air. I think I said blood. Air was in the substance of the brain.
And that meant that during that operation, somebody would have had to penetrate one of the membranes to have the blood go down further in the brain.
Actually,
right?
the air.
Yeah, the air.
So when Dr. Tenny found that out and should have known what occurred, he told the family that she unfortunately must have had a stroke, just a coincidence, it had nothing to do with the surgery, and we were going to have to wait and see how she does. Mm-hmm. So that was day one of what occurred.
But that was a lie.
Well, it turned out to be a lie, mm-hmm. and a lie that he actually admitted to.
Right.
The next day, she didn't get any better. In fact, she was getting worse. He had another CT scan done that showed a larger amount of actually there was blood and air in the brain, a larger amount of hemorrhage in the brain, and he ordered the operating room be opened up. He was going to come in and do surgery. He didn't tell the family this. He didn't tell anybody that, other than the person in the operating suite. He then didn't show up to do the surgery, essentially canceling it by not showing up.
Without telling anybody.
Without telling anybody. The next day, March 1st, the family was very unhappy about not knowing what was going on and asked that there be a neurology consult. And a doctor named Gordon Kelly came in, neurologist, looked over the situation, saw the CT scan, saw the air in the parenchyma of the brain, called Dr. Tenny. Dr. Tenny didn't tell him that anything went wrong during surgery. Dr. Kelly wasn't convinced, and he filed an incident report that night, the night of the 1st of March. The next day, the risk manager of the hospital gets a hold of the case, calls Dr. Tenny in, and that's when his story comes out for the first time. His story being that while he was in surgery and had turned his back to the table preparing some equipment, the surgical technician, who he specifically identified as Chuck Schwegler, who he knew very, very well, had gone in unauthorized, inappropriately, and done a aggressive lavage, or an aggressive washing out of the burr hole that he had made.
This is with like a hand pump,
yes.
correct? Okay.
And that during this aggressive maneuver, Miss Chase was injured to the point where he actually saw a piece of her brain coming out of the burr hole, something that he didn't mention at all in any of the records, and he didn't tell any of the other physicians up to that point. And when the risk manager then starts to look into it, she finds out very quickly that Chuck Schwegler, who he identified as the person who did it, wasn't even involved in the surgery.
Right.
It was a gentleman named Sergio Valadez. And that is documented in the record, and that is what every person in the operating room said.
There was a window of opportunity, which he could have corrected maybe the problem.
Right. In one of the most disturbing parts of the case, in addition to what happened actually in the operating room, which was disturbing in and of itself, is that Dr. Tenny literally took from the family an opportunity to participate in their mother's healthcare decisions. Yeah. He took from a very tight-knit family the opportunity to at least try to help their mother. And that was a very traumatic thing for the family, and very disturbing to Vic and I as lawyers who've done these cases.
I understand you settled the case, didn't go to trial, correct?
True.
And you settled it for the insurance limits of what, about $1 million?
Only $1 million. It's hard to get much more than that in a case like this in Kansas, even if you go to trial, because we have a cap on what can be recovered.
We have with us today a lot of the video depositions of both Dr. Tenny, as well as many people who refuted a lot of the testimony that he gave in his video deposition. We're going to show some of that right now, because I think it's important to see. You used the word misrepresented. I like to use the word lied on camera, and it's amazing. One of the things we're going to go to right now is Dr. Tenny's deposition, where he's talking, where he's identifying and blaming the wrong surgical tech. So let's do that right now.
And your position is that with Mr. Schwegler acting in the role of surgical tech did something inappropriate and may have injured your patient.
That is correct.
But you also know that the records show it was Mr. Valdez, and everybody's testified in the statements that you read that it was Sergio Valdez who was the surgical tech.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Schwegler and everybody else says he didn't even scrub in, but you're saying that he did scrub in.
Yes, sir.
So do you believe that all of the other people in the operating room have conspired to identify Sergio Valdez as the surgical tech when in fact it was Mr. Schwegler?
Well, I can't comment as far as their motives or intentions or their memory of the events. I can only testify to what I observed.
Your testimony that you didn't think or realize that seeing a chunk of brain drain out of a burr hole was significant enough to put into your operative note?
I think, well, I felt that I had initially added that put that in the operative note originally, and I realized it was not.
The interesting thing about some of the next depositions, the little segments we're going to show, is the amount of people, the number of people, both surgical techs who one claims he was not there, and he wasn't, and that is, his name is Chuck Schwegler, is that correct?
Correct.
And the surgical tech, Sergio Valadez, who actually was in the room. We're going to show segments of that.
And had a memory of Dr. Tenny using what he called a bayonet forceps and having difficulty getting it in the burr hole. At some point, did you realize that Dr. Tenny was accusing you of inflicting injury on his patient?
No, sir.
When you'd been told?
I was told that he said that I had been scrubbed in on the case.
Were you scrubbed in on the case?
No, sir.
What was your role in the surgery that was done on Mrs. Chase on February 27th, 2007?
My role as surgical technologist, I prepare the room for the procedure. I open sterile supplies onto the sterile field and prepare everything and wait for the doctor's instruction.
Was Chuck Schwegler involved in any aspect of the surgery on Mrs. Chase?
No.
We have another deposition which we're going to show also, which is Christine Miller, who was a circulating nurse who was responsible for writing down the names of everybody who was in the operation.
I would have typed in their name, their role, and their in and out times, yes.
So the first one is Sergio Valadez?
Yes.
And you typed in that he did the scrub?
Yes.
That's the scrub tech job?
Yes.
Fortunately, we have some of Maribeth's children here today, and we're going to bring on her son, Dr. John Chase. So let's bring him on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. John Chase. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you.
You are an orthopedic surgeon, are you not?
Correct.
And you were very much involved when your mother was in the hospital. Tell us a little bit about your mom and what was going on those fateful 2 weeks.
Well, my mom was a great lady. She was very interested in her children and grandchildren and spent a lot of time. In fact, shortly before this happened, she just came and visited us and had gone to my daughter's high school senior soccer game.
And you were down in Florida.
Correct.
Your mom was 77, so she was pretty active, traveling all over. And that
Very
sort of
active. She went to elder hostels, traveled to Rome. She was very active. Mm-hmm. And we found out she was going to have this surgery, and thought it was going to be fairly routine, and then clearly turned out not to be.
Yeah, and from a doctor's point of view, this is fairly routine surgery, right?
Well, I'm not a neurosurgeon. We don't call surgeries routine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't supposed to be real complicated. And then when things started unraveling and we figured out that this wasn't how it was supposed to be going, then we realized it was a fairly tragic complication.
I understand that Dr. Tenny basically lied to you and the rest of your family members when he came out and he said that your mom suffered a stroke.
Yeah, he blatantly lied.
Yeah, and that he said everything went fine in the operation when it didn't, right?
Everything went great. And
yeah,
clearly
those were the exact words.
Those were his exact words.
How does that make you feel?
Makes me very angry.
Mm-hmm.
As a physician, I like to think we have a profession that does a good job of taking care of people. So it offends me greatly from my mom's perspective and our family's perspective, but also as a physician to think one of the members of my profession would behave like this.
From my understanding, it's 3 years since your sister wrote a letter, and you wrote a letter to the Kansas Board of Healing Arts, which is a Kansas Medical Review Board, and no disciplinary action has been taken against them.
This is the thing that upsets us most right now that our mom is gone, is that he is still practicing. There are still people who are unwittingly being assigned to him as his patient, and that he still can be practicing like this with the judgment and the ethics that he has.
I want to add something what John said. The issue was not so much that Dr. Tenny made a mistake during surgery. That can happen. That may be negligence, and you have to be responsible for it. The problem was the deception, the misrepresentation, what John called the lies that occurred after that and the unethical conduct.
Right.
That's what really is the aggravating
It's
feature
the
of the case.
cover-up. He tried to cover up his own actions.
Well, and it kept my mom from having her family and the doctors taking care of her, knowing what really happened, so something could have been done to help her.
I'd be outraged. Thank you very much for being on the program. It's my great pleasure to introduce Claire Chase and Abby Clutter to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Let's talk about your mom. Tell our audience a little bit about what kind of mom she was.
She was a great mother. She raised all 4 of us kids and very involved. She was a great school teacher. She was a speech therapist, and she was a great grandmother to all of our children.
But she was very active, even at 77 years old, wasn't she?
She was very active. She would come to visit us as much as she could. When she'd come to visit us, she'd go to the sporting events our kids were involved in, or she'd even get together with some of my friends when I would be at work. She would go out and do her own thing.
Checking up on you.
Yeah, she would.
You are a nurse, right?
Yes, I am.
And you're an accountant.
That's correct.
Tell us what your opinion is of Dr. Tenny and what happened with your mom.
I feel like Dr. Tenny cost my mother her life. And not just in his initial mistake that was made in the operating room, but his behavior afterwards.
Right.
As a resident of the Kansas City area where he lives, I find it disturbing that he still is practicing in this area.
Yeah, that's another, because you wrote the letter initially.
I wrote the letter to the Kansas Board of Healing
And that
Arts.
was 3.5 years ago, I believe.
That's
Nothing
correct.
has taken place. Well, I'm just kind of curious, do you follow up? Do you call the Kansas Board of Healing Arts? Can you call them?
Yes, you can call them. I've called them and talked to them.
And what do they say?
They say they can't tell me anything other than the fact that they have received all the information that our attorney has sent them.
Right.
And that if definite action is taken, we'll be notified, and we should keep them apprised of our address, but that they can't really tell us anything.
Do you have to be careful? You're in the medical field. Do you have to be careful about what you say about him? Do you work at any hospitals where he has
I'm a school
friends?
nurse, but I don't feel like I need to be careful. I've made it very clear to anybody who's asked my feelings about him. I feel like he's a very unethical practitioner.
Right.
He was very disrespectful of our wishes, and the care was very poor. And I don't feel like I have to be careful. I'm very honest about my feelings about how he handled the case.
Yeah, we have already shown on the show some of the depositions that he was involved with, and when he claims that one surgical tech was in the room when that person wasn't, and there's only 4 people in the room, that's a lie, you know. I still haven't figured out why he named that surgical tech rather than the correct one.
I think he caught himself in a lie, and he didn't know.
Yeah.
He when you lie, it's going to catch up with you, and it caught up with him.
Yeah.
And I think when we started finding out, he was backpedaling very quickly.
I really appreciate you, both of you, coming to be on the show and sharing your experiences, and thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to introduce Kid Hansen to the show. Welcome to the show, Kid.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your mom.
My mom was, I describe her as an educator, and she loved books. She loved working with kids. She loved her grandchildren. She loved passing on her love of books and education to her grandkids, and she was a great lady.
Unfortunately, she ran into Dr. Tenny.
Right.
Tell us your opinion of Dr. Tenny.
Dr. Tenny did a great disservice to my family, and he basically wrote my mom off. He made a mistake, and we all know people can make mistakes. Doctors can make mistakes, but the mistake he made cost my mom her life.
Mm-hmm.
Cost her the opportunity to see events in her grandchildren's life.
Well, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us on the show. I know you traveled a great distance to be here, and we thank you very much. This family that you represented is a wonderful family, did a great job for them. There are other folks out there that may be victims of medical malpractice. What is medical malpractice?
Medical malpractice or medical negligence essentially is when a healthcare provider in providing care either does something that a reasonable provider would not do, or fails to do that which we expect of a reasonable provider. And once that happens, and that's called falling below the standard of care, if that breach of the standard of care causes harm to somebody, those are the elements of medical negligence or medical malpractice.
What do you do if you suspect medical malpractice?
Well, what's important is to act sooner rather than later. Memories fade. And the other thing is, in medical negligence cases, one of the unique aspects is, unlike other litigation, we have a medical record. We have sort of documentation usually of what did or did not happen. And it's important for somebody who suspects medical negligence or malpractice to go get their records. When they do that, go get them so that when you contact a lawyer, you can take those.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the program. This was a great case. You did really a great service to the family. Unfortunately, it resulted, in the death of Maribeth, but the family has partial resolution. We'd like to see final resolution, and thank you very much for being on the program. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.